only 1.6% of the college football athletes make the pros. Who is looking out for these kids? Who's looking out for their best interest? The number one question that I typically get is, how does somebody find good financial representation? The answer that I always give them is,
welcome into Impactful Conversations, stories and lessons for financial advisors. I'm your host, Dave Edgecombe. Joining me again, friend of the pod, we got one of our sales VPs, Eddie Nolan here. Previously, we talked Shohei Ohtani, the Dodgers, security benefit, and all the interesting things going on with that contract. Well, back by popular demand, the people wanted us to talk NIL because, boy, is it interesting, and boy, are there a lot of layers to that onion. So we're going to try and peel back some of those layers. A word you'll hear a lot probably in this pod is amateurism and amateur, but my guy here, no amateur to this. And I really want you to start us off with, I guess, sort of a history lesson, because I truly think that the evolution of how we got here matters tremendously when trying to have this NIL conversation.
well, Dave, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me. I think if you're really going to talk about NIL, for the most part, you have to go back in history and kind of say, how did we get here, right? So if you look at the way the NCAA has always looked at NIL, they've always looked at their athletes as amateurs, right?
Oh boy,
so
built houses on that too.
They get money for tuition and books and whatever. But at the end of the day, they're an amateur athlete, which means, candidly, they don't have to pay them, right? And so I think the money aspect really for me started, with kind of go back in time, EA Sports. You remember, it's in the game, right?
So I remember it being in the game. That's right.
I was not a big video game player, but man, I had a lot of friends that were into it, and it was crazy. Like the athletes were so recognizable, and for me, it's probably the biggest one. If you remember, 2012 Heisman winner, Johnny Football, Johnny Manziel, Texas A&M, exactly right. All the kids, with the little money sign. You saw this everywhere you went.
Yep.
And so at that point, you kind of, as a spectator, kind of realize like there's something going on here, right? Yeah. So we kind of even go fast forward to there. So a couple of years later, Ed O'Bannon, who hadn't played for a long time, but was a former UCLA basketball player.
Mid-90s UCLA teams.
He files a lawsuit, and basically he says, hey, I'm playing this video game, and the character in the video game looks like me, acts like me,
wearing the same number as me,
same number, shoots the same way he does. I mean, it's eerily similar to him. And he's like, I should be compensated for this because those video game people were making, as you know, a ton of money.
Oh, yeah.
So this goes all the way into the U.S. District Court. And in 2014, the district court rules that it's unreasonable, right? It's unreasonable that these athletes probably should be compensated in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that happens. We kind of fast forward several years. We get into 2021, and a guy by the name of Sean Alston sues the NCAA. And this one's a little bit more recognizable for us because it is a lawsuit that kind of defined what NIL is, right? Mm-hmm. So it really got into the name, image, and likeness of these players. And basically, this one went all the way to the Supreme Court. Yeah. And the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in favor of the athletes against the NCAA, saying that these athletes really aren't the amateurs that you're saying they are.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the moment, like in 2021, when that decision comes down from the Supreme Court, that's the tide shift. That's sort of the line of demarcation and the line in the sand for this new era of NCAA sports that we're currently embarking on. And I think the early thought was, oh boy, this is gonna be really interesting. And I think for the first year and change, it was, because there was not a whole lot of policing going on. How could you? It was all so new.
So that's a great point, because what we think name, image, and likeness should be is really nothing like it is right now, right? Yeah. So it was just supposed to be, hey, if some company is out there and they're monetizing on you and your brand, you should, in theory, get a piece of that. And that's not what happened. I mean, it really is now a, wild, wild west of, basically all these universities out there with boosters and large alumni kind of handpicking, 5-star recruits and different things to try and lure them to their program very specifically from a monetary standpoint, right?
Yeah. And I think when I looked back and was doing the research to try and see, well, what has changed? Well, the nature of what it means to be an amateur athlete has changed immensely. And you think back, I picked a year, 1960. Okay, how much revenue was the NCAA bringing in 1960? They don't have huge TV contracts. There's not really, you're not truly going to be a professional football player. You're not going to that's not the route that a lot of people were taking. It was there, but it's not what it is today. They're not billion-dollar industries. And in 1960, the NCAA net about $1 million. In 2020, $1 billion. And
A lot of money.
And while the value of the scholarship increased, it did not increase at that same rate.
Yeah, and once again, on paper, it makes sense, right? That we're moving in this direction.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of value to what these athletes bring a school, right? Like, how many Johnny football jerseys did Texas A&M sell?
Oh, yeah. And the jersey sales, I mean, the NCAA and schools have been making a killing on, if I just don't put their name on the back of it, it can be anybody.
Yeah, but you know the number. Yeah, exactly. I think the other interesting thing here is, and we touched about it very briefly, is the boosters and the alumni and the amount of dollars that they bring in outside of the university. So if you kind of look at the process here, you get into this NIL deal, and then they have this thing called the collective, right?
Yeah.
You and I were chatting briefly about this before we started. What the collective is to me is it's kind of an agent between the school and the athlete, right? And so you got to have something in there because there's so much stuff that's not disclosed in NIL deals, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much there that we don't know, and there's got to be something there that kind of protects the student athlete, right? And so you have these collective models that basically kind of, all right, well, here's what the athlete's going to be responsible for, and here's an idea of what they're going to get compensated on, and so on and so forth. But because these are private deals, there's always a possibility of somebody getting taken advantage of, and by somebody, I mean the athlete, right? So,
yeah, and I think that component of it, and having sort of, these players need agents. They not in the literal sense they need an agent like a Scott Boras. No, they need an advocate. They need someone to help them kind of better understand these, because like you said, Wild West, I mean, it was really easy for a deal to get inked and then all of a sudden a misunderstanding. And I wonder how many of those that we haven't even really heard about, and we'll see the 30 for 30 in 30 years that documents all of this, the Wild West of NIL.
Maybe you'll be featured on
it. Who knows? Who knows?
I think the big thing now is these athletes are no longer athletes. They're literally entrepreneurs, right? They have a brand. They have something that they're bringing to the table, and they're trying to do the best to capitalize viewers and drive revenue towards themselves. And so now you get into this, I'm no longer a college athlete, but I'm an entrepreneur. And so let me give you, off the top of my head, just two quick examples of that. So I mean no disrespect by this to any athlete. I'm just these are two things that kind of stick out in my head. So first of all, you got Bryce Underwood. So Bryce Underwood, the top 25 most recruited quarterback, right, in high school, he commits to LSU. Well, like we said, deep pockets draw interest. And so all of a sudden he decommits from LSU and he goes to Michigan, and you hear that it could be upwards of $10 million plus for him to go from LSU to. Now, I don't blame him. I mean, good for him.
Yeah.
There's other extreme examples like the young man from Tennessee who just transferred to
Nico Imaliva.
Yeah. So Nico Imaliva, that's another really interesting one, right? So he comes into Tennessee, and he basically says after a year there where he was kind of showcased and was very, very good for Tennessee, I want more money. And you're literally talking about the spring of the football year. Mm. And the coach basically says, you're not getting any more money. Like, this is what they agreed about. Well, as we know from the transfer portal, he jumps in the transfer portal, and now he's up for the biggest bidder. He ends up over at UCLA. So I think the big thing was this NIL, which was really kind of laid out to benefit the athletes, to make sure they were being compensated for people that were using their name, image, and likeness without their consent, has now turned into something that nobody saw coming, right? So now you've got this transfer portal where these athletes jump in there, and every year there seems to be more and more of them. And some schools are doing really good. They're doing incredibly well with waiting to see how these young athletes, high school players, transition to the college game, and then try to incent them, if you will, to come to their university. And Indiana is probably the biggest one for me in college football, which stands out.
Yeah.
Indiana, not historically a huge college football program, now all of a sudden is right there at the top. And most of those kids are transfer kids.
Yeah. When we talk about just amateurism in general and how it has evolved and how it has grown so much. I mean, we work with financial advisors. I mean, this is not a sports podcast. This is more of a finance podcast. And I would say the comparison of just how it has evolved and how it has changed. Well, I mean, you could look no further than Social Security and what it was set out to be. And, oh, this is going to be great. On paper, this is going to work just fine. Well, then people start living to 90, and then you start to pick at it a little bit. And all of a sudden, you've got a significantly different landscape that needs adjusting or needs some sort of love in terms of getting it back on the track.
I think that's a great analogy. Social Security is probably interesting because, like you said, when Social Security was created, the retirement age and the
life expectancy
cycle,
age was pretty close to when you were going to be retiring.
You weren't supposed to be in Social Security for a long period of time. And now you got people retiring even before 60 and living, I think the average median age for a female is like 86 or 88, and maybe a male is 86. So these people theoretically are in retirement collecting this check for a long period of time. And we talked about that in the last podcast. You know, to me, you brought up something interesting in the break too. The difference between a pension and Social Security. Like, you know, in our world, people sell annuities, right? And some people are turned off by annuities. And I always ask people like, okay, well, you're not going to take your Social Security then, right?
Yeah, you're good with it, right?
Yeah, and they're like, what do you mean I'm not going to take my Social Security? And I'm like, well, Social Security basically, in essence, is an annuity. You're paying into it your life expectancy with the notion that when you retire and you no longer have a paycheck, that you're going to get a check to offset your expenses on a monthly basis, right? And the difference between that and a pension is your employer, and the pension is putting money into your paycheck, whereas Social Security, it's you. But to your point, there is no really federal regulation in this, but it's coming. It is definitely coming.
And are you surprised that it's taken, I mean, granted, 2021 is when this whole thing kind of starts, and now it's 2025, and we've seen some changes, and now they've got the collective where it's capped at $20.5 million, and that's been a big change. Are you surprised that the change has kind of come to it so slow?
You know, I'm going to give a shout out to my old boss, Nick Gilliam, right? So Nick used to always say, anytime there's an issue, follow the money trail. And what he meant by that is typically, not always, but typically, if there is some sort of issue, if you kind of backtrack it, it's a financial issue, right? And in this instance, like you said, $1 billion in the college programs, these kids not getting money. Now, all of a sudden, there's a lot of hands in the cookie jar, right?
Yeah.
And so when you get a lot of hands in the cookie jar, things slow down. But getting back to the federal regulation side, you are already starting to see a lot of stuff behind the scenes from, you know, there's a representative in Florida that's pushing this new regulation called the SCORE Act.
Yep.
And the SCORE Act is Student Compensation and Opportunity Rights and Endorsements, something, right? But basically,
alphabet soup.
It literally is like trying to, okay, I'm going to elevate the athlete and make sure that they're taken care of. There's also a SAFE Act, which is a little bit more mainstream because it's Senator Cory Booker and it is Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, Cory Booker being of New Jersey, of course. And those two senators are also now kind of, hey, how do we look out for these student athletes and make sure that they're okay and that they're getting properly compensated and stuff like that. Maybe in essence, they become 1099 employees of the university. But at the end of the day, these kids, like when you think about it, so we're talking specifically college football in a lot of this.
Yeah, and that's really, the conversation is college football, men's basketball. Yes, it exists in a couple other spots, but those are the revenue drivers.
Yeah, and it's a shame because there's a lot of these other programs now because of all this realignment where you've got, somebody from UCLA who normally played West Coast teams, they're having to fly across for like women's lacrosse or swimming or things like that,
Yeah.
where they're now having to fly across the country in essence to compete. And so they've got that whole deal to kind of work with. But at the end of the day, it's really in football. If you look at the numbers, only 1.6% of the college football athletes make the pros. So now you have to think these kids are getting a bunch of money. Like, who is looking out for these kids? Who's looking out for their best interests? And being in this industry for about 25 years, the number one question that I typically get is, how does somebody find good financial representation? And the answer that I always give them is, it really is kind of a twofold answer. Number one, you want to have somebody who's a fiduciary.
Yep.
And the definition of that for people that don't know is a fiduciary is somebody who has to act in your interest, right? Legally, they're required to act in your best interest.
And it's a test they have to take to get that certification.
Yeah, it's typically it's not just Series 65 license exam and stuff like that. Exactly, right? And then the other thing for me, and this is probably just me, so it doesn't, I don't want to belittle anybody that's with a big corporation, but I always try to find somebody who's independent. And what I mean when I tell people to try and find somebody who's independent is try to find somebody who doesn't work for a big company where they've got certain things on the truck that they're promoting, right?
Yeah.
Try to find somebody who's independent that could go anywhere. Because the truth about holistic planning, especially for these young kids that are getting this chunk of money, and who knows, a lot of them come from very humble means.
Yeah, it's a life-changing amount of
money. It's
money.
a life-changing amount of money, and it should last them their life, right? And so they have to have good sound advice. So, somebody who's independent could use life insurance. That obviously long-term care as somebody gets older, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, manage money, annuities, like we talked about before. You want somebody who really kind of says, okay, based on your personal needs, let's look at all these things that are available to you, and let's figure out what's in your best interest.
And what works for you, because it is not just hey, what worked for this
different.
offensive tackle should work for this offensive line. No, everyone's different.
100%. Yep, agreed.
You said something in there about what Senator Cory Booker has suggested in the idea of them becoming 1099 employees. And I thought to myself, as I was doing my research, like, what's to stop that from being the next iteration, that they just become employees and you just pay them? And then I thought to myself, oh boy, that's going to open up a whole different kind of can of worms from a financial standpoint of you have to offer health insurance, you have to offer benefits, they can go on. I mean, you have to offer that, you have to treat them differently than when you're just, yeah, sure, we'll cut you a check through this third party. So do you see that happening? Do you think that's
there's something? So that's a great question. So I'm going to answer a question probably with a question.
Oh boy.
Literally, would you have thought from that first 2021 lawsuit that was brought against the NCAA that we would be here, right? And so I have no idea, man. It's gonna be really interesting to get to like 2030 and see what the NIL landscape, if it's even called NIL, what it looks like really. So another thing is just to kind of reiterate that monetary issue that we're talking about, because once again, follow the money trail. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Nick, right? If you look at Ohio State, and once again, for all my Ohio State fans out there, this is not a dig, but their roster last year when they won the national championship, some people estimate to be somewhere around $20 to $26 million for a college football team. That's what they were paying their student athletes to win that national championship. So there is dollars out there. You're not spending $26 million if there's nothing in return for you, right? Yeah. So who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, I just have a hard time. Well, the more that you've kind of seen the numbers floating around for what an individual athlete is able to get sort of on the free market, so to speak, it makes you realize why the NCAA didn't really want any of this to happen. And they were very happy with the status quo of amateurism, because these are the Brinks trucks backing up at every school.
And you hit on it before. I mean, if you look at it now, these top Power 5 schools, they're going to be required to share about $20.5 million with these athletes out of their program. So yeah, deep pockets.
And one thing that I wanted just to get to was the aspect of the booster money. And yeah, there was the heyday in college sports where it was, under the table.
Oh, the
Hey,
old
the
Miami
old
days, baby.
suitcase
Here
full
we-
of money, or Eric Dickerson and the Trans A&M and all these stories
yeah.
about recruiting in college sports. And now you don't really get that quite as much. I think at first it was a little bit of the Wild West, and now it's starting to kind of be a little bit more over the table. It's, this money is coming from this person and so and so. But what it means is you have a situation that kind of is unfolding at LSU where Brian Kelly underperforms, the boosters step up and say, hey, no, we want this guy out. Well, hold on. He's got a huge contract, $54 million buyout. We're not going to pay. I'll pay it. He's out. Okay, this guy's going to pay it. You just gave that guy a lot of say in what's going to happen next with your program, so much so that the governor of LSU comes out, or the governor of Louisiana comes out and says, that guy, that athletic director, he's not picking the next head coach.
You might have just opened Pandora's box. We might have to go into another episode on this, but yeah, it's really interesting when the governor steps in and now they're directing people to handle this and that. And you got regular Joe Schmoes that candidly aren't trained in this, but because they got money, all of a sudden they feel like I should be able to have say in the team. Yeah. And probably this is not a great example of that, but Jerry Jones and the Cowboys.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what goes on behind the doors, but what you hear is I could be the GM of the Cowboys. I could be the head coach of the Cowboys. But at the end of the day, Jerry is involved and his say is what happens.
Yeah. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like a parallel could be back to retirement and why it's so important to have that one voice and why it's so important to have a fiduciary that's got your back is if you're basing what you're going to do and how you handle your finances by water cooler talk or what your in-laws are doing, and you have all these different voices, you have all these boosters that are saying, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. Oh, I would do this. I would do this. You're not in control. And when it comes to your retirement, it's your retirement. Yes, you have a spouse and yes, other people are involved, but you got to be able to have the confidence to know that this is what I'm going to do. And I'm confident that the person that I'm working with has my best interest in mind. And I think what you're seeing now is with the boosters involved and more people feeling like they get a seat at the table. It's a lot of cooks in that kitchen.
Yeah. In this new regulation, and there will be federal regulation at some point, it's coming. There's even talk about limiting representatives or to 5% of compensation for the athletes. The scary thing is right now, some of these kids have family members advising them. And you're talking about uncles who have.
Oh, the uncle. Those are the
recruiters. Little, if no experience or expertise in this type of stuff. And all of a sudden they're now managing the kids. So yeah, absolutely. You need to have, there probably needs to be regulation and there probably needs to be oversight and there probably needs to be some wise counsel around some of these kids. Cause as we know, 98+% of them are not going to make the NFL.
Is this a real opportunity for financial advisors to teach financial literacy or do you think colleges need to kind of take the reins on that to make sure that their student athletes are armed with knowledge about this sort of thing?
So I'm sure it's different because I haven't been to college in a long time, although I've put 2 kids through college. But when I was in school, they didn't teach very much on managing money at all, right? As a matter of fact, the total opposite. You'd go to the campus and they'd be giving away free sweatshirts for the ability to sign a credit card when you had no income coming in.
It was a different
time.
So
it was definitely a different time. So I'm kind of dating myself, but at the end of the day, absolutely, right? There has to be something. And like I said, there's no telling what this is going to look like in a couple of years. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, and I know that one topic that we hinted at that we're going to need to bring you back onto the podcast for, and speaking of regulation and everything, is gambling, sports gambling, and speaking of Pandora's box.
That'll be an interesting one for sure.
Trying to put the pieces back together for that thing, I think, will be really interesting. Eddie, thank you so much. Is there anything we left on the table? I mean, I know we could go all day about NIL, and I know you had some other examples, but
I'm not shy. I could talk all day, but I'll leave it at that.
I'll leave it at that as well. So if you're interested in hearing more from us, then I would tell you to look at our YouTube channel. We've got some great resources on there, selling with stories, house rules, some phenomenal testimonials. And I cannot stress this enough. You got to like and subscribe. That's the way that moves the needle for us, that gets us where we want to be from a YouTube standpoint, but it really helps you get notified. I mean, you find out when the best content is coming out, courtesy of us and what we create here over at Impact. So with all that said, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.